Hello, hi. This is the first bet. Every successful person gets interviewed about how they won, and nobody takes them back to months before they knew that it would work, when the information was thin, when the money was real, and they pushed their chips in anyway. That's what we do here on the first bet. I'm Martin Tobias, and I've bet money three ways: as a CEO, as a pre-seed investor, and as a poker player. And today, my guest today has 15 years inside the machines at Apple, Google, BlackBerry, Toyota, shipping hardware that ended up in billions of pockets. He looked at the factory floors still running old paper and ERPs before the iPhone and decided that's where the money was going, not after the manufacturing, AI manufacturing moment has arrived, but before that. And that's what I want to talk to about today. Simon Lancaster is the founding partner of Omni Ventures, self-branded as a manufacturing VC. He's also co-author of Unlocking Alpha, The Rise of the Niche VC, which I've read. I really recommend it. The bet we're here to talk about is the first one, leaving the logos and raising a fund in a sector that the market had kind of written off or thought was too small, and writing a check before it
Mhm.
looked it's inevitable. He recently announced last week a $33 million fund. Simon, welcome.
Thank you so much, Martin. Really appreciate the warm intro, and I'm really
Yeah,
happy to be here. Excited to talk to you.
yeah, thanks. And I've enjoyed, we were at that dinner with Michael Dunning that one time, and we hung out in Sundance and got our cowboy hats. That was a lot of fun. Um, so uh, I want to talk about the bet that you made of leaving the safe companies and deciding to start a fund before it was obvious. And I think even in your announcement of your fund last week, you noted that even a year ago it was a little counterintuitive to do a pre-seed fund. There were big funds putting big investments in, but the idea
Hmm.
of the first check into some of these manufacturing ideas was a little counterintuitive.
Hmm.
But you had some conviction. Maybe talk to me about before the market agreed. How did you get conviction, and how did you think about putting your own capital in to a fund that early in that sector?
Sure. Yeah, that's great talking point start. Maybe I'll just start with kind of like a tidbit, which I still find quite interesting even today, is when we bring up the thesis of our fund being manufacturing tech. Um, People are like, "Oh, you mean like building factories?" And I say, "Well, if I were to say fintech, would you say building banks?" And so you can take that same analogy with biotech, fintech, construction tech, etc. There's really this, I guess, left behind mentality around manufacturing where people just don't associate technology with manufacturing in the least, in especially Silicon Valley technology. Um, Capital light, software centered or technology centered bets. So that's kind of, I think, the current day point still. But to your question, going back a couple of years, um, as you mentioned, there had been some larger investments into capital intensive deals, but as we started the firm, we actually initially thought, okay, deep tech hardware, and realized that venture capital was kind of becoming a little bit commoditized, both in good and bad. And I touch on this in the book. Like, it's becoming democratized. Almost anyone can start a capital efficient venture capital firm. Um, and that led us to think, okay, well, if we just took that ability to be capital efficient ourselves to the nth degree, where would we focus? Where is our alpha? Where is our own
Mhm.
differentiation? And where can we see ahead of the curve and around corners where others couldn't? And we just kind of kept double clicking hardware, deep tech. The next level was manufacturing. And when we looked at manufacturing under the microscope, I guess you could say, we realized a few interesting things. One is it really had been left behind. One of the major talking points that we have in our fund's thesis presentation, our own pitch deck, is that all the major sectors of the GDP, take finance with fintech, business services with SaaS, um, IT with search and the web, the list kind of goes on. They've all been digitally transformed, and manufacturing is essentially industrials and manufacturing is essentially the last bastion. And
Mhm.
and this was 23, 24, and we said, okay, well, it's not going to be like that forever. It's impossible. It cannot continue to be left behind and undigitized and run on paper and Excel
Mhm.
and email forever. So are we at the tipping point? That was kind of really the point of the big bet for this firm.
Okay. And so when you say digitization, because you started with sort of deep tech
Yeah.
and hardware, um, is that what you're investing in, or is it more the software? Like,
Mhm.
for example, I invested in Factory.app, which is a lightweight ERP for small manufacturers like CNC shops. And my insight there was that most ERPs were big Oracle for, Ford and GM, but the small manufacturers where 80% of the capacity is had been left out, and there was no cheap, easy sort of mid-market thing, except Microsoft Dynamics or whatever. Were you thinking more software transformation, or were you thinking
Robotics,
hard
automation,
manufacturing
IoT. Yeah.
hardware that could be reinvented with AI
Mhm.
or something, or monitoring, or what part of the digital transformation are you talking about?
Yeah. It's a great question. Initially, our thesis was just broadly software automation. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
software reduces friction and makes things more efficient. And you can take that, you can build software with whatever the latest Web 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, or AI. You want to be building businesses that are software centric with the latest wave of technology. When we started, it was really SaaS, yes, and what you described would have been our part of our core to our thesis, because yes, we are still lacking in capital efficient software for small, medium-sized businesses and large businesses in manufacturing. Um, but as part of that digital wave, transformation wave, we are also starting to look at physical automation, physical AI, and robotics. And we still consider those to be capital efficient and digital transformation as part of this digital transformation wave, as long as they are actually relatively capital efficient.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen a lot of deals lately that is software around enabling of the robotics, not necessarily the robotics themselves, like how to do the actuator and the arm and stuff like that, but how do you give that robot better spatial
Yeah.
awareness, better
Insights,
yeah,
sensing. Yeah.
yeah, understanding of its physical environment, safety, not, whacking a human as they walk by and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
you're looking at a lot of those software things for robotics in
Yeah.
the
Hardware
manufacturing.
enabled, sensing enabled, robotics enabled software. Um, the challenging thing with these solutions, like you mentioned, Martin, these could be incredible new, let's say ultrasonic sensing to let robots see through walls. And even if we see that it's very useful for whatever spatial awareness, person detection, security, it's who is the customer? It becomes the challenge with this one. And can it be venture scalable? Um, and what we have kind of realized from talking with thousands of customers, many of which are LPs and founders, and from our own experience, is that the full stack solution tends to be the easiest to show ROI. And customers in the industrials and manufacturing space, it's an old industry and they're relatively impatient. So they like to see kind of not necessarily proof of concept, but more like proof of ROI through actual deployments. So how do we thread that needle of being relatively capital efficient, having a novel technology, and a reasonably timed commercialization, not 10 years, but 2 to 3 years. That's what we typically look for, while still having a big bet, hopefully, right? A big bet for venture.
Exactly. So one of the things you noted in your announcement last week of the fund is that when you started raising this fund, which was what, about 3 years ago,
Mhm.
it was really hard to get meetings, and a lot of people were saying maybe this is too small and whatever. But something seemed to have changed like a year ago. Can
Mhm.
you dig in a little bit more to that? Like, how did the first meetings go? And was it a change in your thesis, or was it a change maybe outside of the environment of people saying, "Oh, finally the AI intelligence layer is there"? Or was it
Mhm.
an unlock that was had to do with how you were pitching your thesis, or was it an unlock maybe that was outside your control that happened in just the awareness of
Mhm.
LPs and things like that? Oh, maybe this thing, maybe there is an opportunity here, because there frankly haven't been a lot of really great exits in startups for manufacturing tech yet, but your bet is they're going to be enabled by something, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I would I would argue that, yeah, there have not been a lot of flashy exits in the tens or hundreds of billions. There have been a lot of significant unicorn unicorn exits. The main difference is many of these exits, if not the vast majority, are exits to publicly traded companies, deep pocketed publicly traded companies. And those tend to be not as prominent, not as picked up by the news. But okay, to answer your question, how did our thesis change? How have people's mindsets changed over the last couple of years? We pretty early on we said, okay, this lack of digital transformation is has to be solved. Is the time now? And we felt like it was now. A few years ago we felt like it was coming in the next few years, which is basically now. um, and I'd say that the main factors for that was talking with LPs, like big customers who are LPs, and families that own businesses in this space, and most importantly, talking to the next generation. So the up and coming executives, or the sons of the current owners, and essentially realizing that they were all extremely frustrated with a couple of things. One is just the lack of basic automation, whether it be it software or this combination of software and hardware that you mentioned. Um, and then the other one was fear of labor shortage and the solutions around that. And then lastly, I would say, which is related to just this population that we were talking to in general, the fact that this is a old industry. All the owners have been around for a while. The businesses have been around for a while. These are the customers of all of our portfolio companies that I'm talking about. They were going through a generational shift in management. Like, these up and
Yeah,
coming executives or owners were about to take over, because all the baby boomers that have been running the
yeah,
businesses are now retiring, and will
yeah.
be retired in the next few years. And the next generation just didn't want to run the businesses the same way. Um, and I guess we got that insight from just pitching our fund and talking to lots and lots of prospective LPs, and the ones that just got it the quickest were this persona of, man, this fund solves a real pain point in our operations. Like the fund thesis being able to bring our industry up to the same level of fintech, for example.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen that in other categories too. It seemed like about a year ago, a whole bunch of these second generation people just said, "Hey, I now." The combination of things happening in AI or software development. I think
Hmm.
another thing that I've seen in my portfolio, I was going to ask you if this was something that triggered people too, was the increase in coding capacity given by Claude Code and all these other things. You could now write, whereas a lot of the reasons these industries were left behind is that it was so hard to write
Hmm.
software that
It's
people
true.
were like, oh, we're going to use Excel or some general purpose fucking software because writing software is hard. But the
Hmm.
minute writing software became easy, then they're like, well, maybe I could use some custom software for this because software is easier to write. That seemed to have
Yeah,
been an unlock about a
it's
year ago.
for sure, for sure. Yeah, and I would say, to double click on that, kind of the result of that is two things. Now you can build vertical tools, like not like Oracle and Salesforce that serve everyone but
Yeah,
poorly. You can now build these highly integrated, highly, you know, specialized tools very efficiently, essentially as you're describing. And the other thing it enables is it enables much smaller teams and teams with founders of deep technical background of that field to build the
yeah,
business versus a team of software engineers, which typically, they wouldn't go after this industry. They'd go after something bigger, more lucrative, more flashy type of thing. But the founders that have experienced the pain point firsthand and are like, I'm this is what I'm solving.
yeah.
This is the biggest pain point of my career. Are now able to and therefore serve the customer a lot better, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
exactly. I'm seeing that a lot too. It's that people who understand the business problem very well
mhm,
now have an easier path to create a technical solution versus, trying to hire outsourced developers in India or anything like that. Um,
mhm,
yeah, so that's good. So let me go back a little bit more to, you know, what was the case sort of against doing this? I mean, maybe you could
mhm,
identify two or three of the reasons in the first 2 years that people were saying no. I think part of it was probably, manufacturing moves slowly, long
mhm.
fucking sales
That's
cycles.
right.
These people don't
Too niche.
change, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you could
Yeah.
steel man, the case,
Mhm.
that was against it
For sure.
at the time.
Yeah, I would say, the financially focused LPs that didn't come on board, almost all of them said too niche, which, we can talk about. I'm now adamantly opposed of and any venture fund being too niche. I'm now an LP in like several sub $5 million funds, and arguably, as early angels, I think it's great. Um, the other one is certainly the long sales cycle, and what we saw essentially was that the majority of our great founders that got early traction were essentially showing up with almost like ready-made, tailor-made solutions, like very quickly, that had very short return on investment, right? And like, you, as an executive or an owner, if you're being presented with something that has a very short return on investment, it it's you have to try
You have to
it,
try it.
right? Yeah, you have to try it. Otherwise, you're dead in the water. So
Okay.
so really focusing not on, again, not on concepts, um, but on, you know solutions that provide value, that can work very quickly and that provide value that leads to return on investment very quickly as well.
Okay, super. And talk to me also about how you came up with the fund size and how you decided, pre-seed. I think probably one of the other cases against it was, manufacturing is hard. You got to build manufacturing. It's all capital intensive. Like, how can a
Hmm.
small fucking fund do
Hmm.
anything in a
Right.
capital intensive business? Now you're going, for software, which is less capital intensive and so on. But how did
Hmm.
you end up with about a $30 million fund size, and why do you think that's the right thing to catalyze the founders that you want to catalyze?
Probably, probably the one of the most controversial topics in the industry in general. And I think I've had great debates on our own podcast, Beers with VCs, on this, spray and pray versus
Yeah,
concentration, and different LPs certainly prefer one way or another. Typically, what we found is um, the LPs that want to deploy after you, like the strategics or the fund of funds, they want you to have higher concentration, likelihood to have pro rata, but no pro rata, follow on budgeted. Um, but in our case, we uh, we weighed a few factors, and I'm going to credit my co-GP Sabrina Passman for running you know an insanely detailed uh, fund model where we looked at essentially every single exit in the last 30 years in the industrial space. And we kind of
interesting.
filtered them down by, okay, essentially regression analysis. Would we have invested in these based on our thesis? What was the fund? What was the fund? Sorry, what was the exit of that startup? And then what would our ownership need to be at the beginning, given various simulated number of bets and a fund size that we thought we could raise based on being first-time fund managers with limited um, institutional investment experience. And we felt like also we went through Coolwater Capital, and we
Yep.
got Allocator One to anchor our early close. Both of them, very, very professional, pseudo institutional fund of funds, meaning they're just emerging still, but I think highly of all of them. Um, and we, at the end of the day, decided to go for the approach that we talk about in the book, Unlocking Alpha, but it's essentially a specialist approach, assuming that we, with our focus and mastery, were able to um, see ahead of the curve in our vertical. Sorry, I reference mastery and focus, like the three things in the book that we emphasize: mastery, focus, and network being generators of alpha.
Yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit more about that because you did write a whole book about how to generate alpha from emerging managers. And can you go a little deeper on those three things, the three things you think that these smaller emerging managers get or have or can have that differentiate them from the bigger funds? Because I know a lot of people think about venture and they're like, oh, it's Andreessen Horowitz, it's Sequoia, and but I mean, these smaller funds are a completely different asset class, and they need and they have completely different advantages over these bigger funds. These bigger funds, are really a completely different business. What have you did you identify by talking to lots of other emerging managers as frameworks or things that emerging managers can use to pick and generate alpha in ways that maybe some larger funds cannot or do not?
Hmm. Hmm. I think essentially, uh, as an emerging manager likely to be focused on pre-seed with a smaller fund, you have limited options. Option one is you do, you know, pray and spray approach, and you get exposure to many deals, and you hope to hit on a big bet, on a big outcome as one of those deals. The other approach is to do less deals, get higher ownership, and earn your way into the deal through essentially your focus or specialization. I think there are excellent managers that have actually managed with both. And
Yep.
even in the generalist approach, you can compensate for your lack of background and expertise through having a really insane network effect, essentially. Um, and the approach that we chose, having come from industry and being uh, having double clicked through the layers of deep tech to or hardware to deep tech to manufacturing, was essentially to be very, very focused on a single stage pre-seed and to bring value to founders through our industry expertise and also, just as importantly, our industry connections. And that's really where we've seen ourselves um, getting very high quality deal flow and being able to win deals in competitive rounds. And yes, also to your point, successfully raising a $33 million fund in arguably one of the toughest environments, toughest times, right, in the last 20 years.
So what are those three things again that you mentioned for a
Yeah. So
focus?
so in the introduction, thank you for for asking. In the introduction of the book, we essentially define alpha as MFN, mastery, which is deep domain expertise,
Particular action. Okay.
and you know maybe you could call that specialization. Focus is kind of two things. It's being focused on your area of expertise, that being essentially knowing to be focused on your area of edge. And then the last one is network.
Okay.
And
And,
network is, it's a bit of a catch-all, but it is a constant reminder that venture is a person and people game, right? You
yeah.
need to earn your way into rounds. You need to be liked. You need to people to want to take your money. And it's like MFN or alpha. It's a product of those three. So you can score low on one or two, but not on all three.
Great. And I like that framework for emerging managers. And I would agree with those three things. And we've talked a lot about how, how you built conviction and what your edge was for your particular fund. But I'd like to pivot a little bit and see if those three things are the same things you apply to founders, or how do you think
Mm.
differently about low information decisions when you deploy capital into founders? Because it's very similar. You're going to find somebody that hopefully has a lot of domain experience and this and
Yes,
that, but is it similar or different, or how would you compare the capital allocation decision to write a check into a pre-seed founder versus, as an LP, your experience trying to raise a VC
for
fund?
sure.
They're similar in some ways, but they're also a little bit different. Maybe you could talk about some of the frameworks that are the same or different about how you think about choosing founders in the pre-seed.
Hmm. Hmm. In preparing for this podcast, I, for the first time, because of the thesis of the podcast and the topic, I made that comparison. But I've
Okay.
never actually answered this question, which is fascinating. Like, how do you evaluate founders using the same methodology? And
Or do you use a
no,
different?
it's very interesting because we actually wrote the book last year, which was 2 years after we developed the thesis for the fund. And the original thesis, like the founder archetype that we uh, wrote, I still remember it quite vividly, was uh, deep tech founders, so like technical founders solving the biggest pain points of their careers. And then we always looked to see if they had spoken with 100 or more customers and how strong their go-to-market network was. So arguably you could say, deep tech technical founders, that's the mastery component. Solving the
Mastery.
biggest pain point of their careers, that's the focus
Focus.
aspect. And then, the commercialization mindset and go-to-market network is their kind of go-to-market unfair advantage. Like how many customers can you call up on day one and get them to try the product? That's the network. So there is actually a very uncanny correlation, which I never thought of before, but certainly, you bring up a really interesting point there, Martian.
Yeah. I agree. When I read the book, I was like, this looks a lot like how I evaluate founders, especially that network thing.
Hmm.
Given that it is so much easier to build software, at one point I might put as a third
Absolutely.
thing, do you have a technical founder? Can you build the product? Can you even build the
Hmm.
fucking product? Especially in deep tech, a lot of times that's the question: can you even build it? But if you're just building software, likely you can build it. The real question is, can you sell it? Can you get any attention in a
Hmm.
complicated market where lots of people are calling up your customers and this and that? And so I focus a lot more these days on what's your distribution wedge, what's your unfair go to
Yeah,
market, and stuff like that. And
absolutely.
if the person is in an industry trade association, or if they worked at a prior, in how you're going to get your first 100 customers. That's
Hmm.
the real differentiator for me for most founders these days, because it's so much easier to
Absolutely.
build whatever product you're building. Um,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. I
absolutely.
agree. Yeah. And when I look at, out of the 30 odd investments we've done, the ones that really stand out are the ones that have an uncanny ability to explain technical problems and their solution and use this to quickly build rapport with customers and investors, right? Like not so much a technical savant, but someone who deeply understands the pain point and is able to build a business to capture that pain point through a solution, but more importantly, clearly communicate that and in so doing build rapport and trust with customers more quickly. And this, to your point, it's becoming more and more important, I think, now.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, that's interesting. We discovered maybe a potentially more portable rule, that your alpha thing for emerging managers fits a little more for um, founders as well. How do you think that it might change, for founders in the next 5 years? It does seem like, this faster software development has unlocked a lot of new applications. You know, I, I've talked to a lot of people that are trying to bundle hardware and software now with these managed services type things. Um, if you're putting on your forward looking hat, how do
Hmm.
you think it's going to be different being a founder 5 years from now in this manufacturing thing versus today?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think one a couple things that are kind of top of mind but nascent. One is the willingness to pay for reoccurring fees is
Software.
is is actually improving, I would say, in the manufacturing industrial space, but it's not like SaaS. It's more like um, what we're seeing is more akin to maintenance or guarantees of service packages tied to um, a human interaction. So almost like AI powered um, services where the company has someone at the customer has someone that they are imagining that service coming from, but that it's very much moving at the speed of AI. That's maybe I don't have like a
Yeah.
clean verbiage for wrapping that up, but um,
I,
that's
I
one thing that we've noticed.
I don't really either, but the trend, I was watching Jensen Yang talk a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things he pointed out, which I hadn't tracked yet before, is that the pace of improvement in AI is an order of magnitude faster than the pace that was following like Moore's law. Basically,
Mhm.
all of software and all of computing followed Moore's law. Every 18 months, the CPU density doubled and the cost halved and this kind of thing, and that was fairly predictable for about 25 years, but it was an 18-month innovation cycle. And in AI you've got like a 3-month innovation, so you've got intelligence doubling every 3 months to 6 months instead of every 18 months. So then when you go forward a couple of years, I mean, I've even seen people saying, we started 3 years ago with a chatbot and we now have agents that can complete full tasks. I think that 3 years is probably faster than people at the beginning of chatbots thought it would be because of the compounding that we've seen, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So it's going to be kind of interesting. We are in the, what's it going to be like in the future business, but I feel less confident in my ability to do that. But what I feel confident in is, making the bets in teams that really understand their problems and are AI native. One of my portfolio companies last week sent me an update. He's like, a year ago I had 15 people. Today I have two, and I'm doing 20% more revenue. So in 1 year, they got way more capital efficient with their business.
Mhm,
And I think you're going to see more of that in every business is capital efficiency. It's
mhm,
kind of
mhm.
kind of kind of kind of interesting. Um, so let's go back. We're getting close to the end of this here. What are some of the things that were the gremlins in this decision? For you, what were some of the people? When you had this conviction, what were some of the things in the back of your head that said maybe this isn't going to work? I mean, what were some of the things that you were worried about? Um, you know, committing your life to doing this new fund.
Yeah, I briefly mentioned it earlier, but I think it's worth bringing up and discussing a little more, was this concept of the fund being too niche or too
Too niche. Okay.
focused, too small, too niche. It does the thesis allow for enough follow-on investment, and especially prior to any big follow-on investors having invested in any of our portfolio companies, like, are there even big follow-on investors
Yeah.
to take these companies to be huge? Um, we took a multi-pronged approach to dispelling that. I would say one was looking at the outcomes and essentially determining that, hey, even if we only have a $1 billion outcome or $800 million outcome, um, could we could that somehow be an advantage to us? Like, if we got in
Yeah.
early enough, and if the exit horizon was short enough, could we make that work, and built out models around that? Um, and the other thing was just looking at, like you mentioned, some of the most capital efficient teams and the way they were building, and very early on seeing that wave coming, and determining that, hey, maybe we are able to build these businesses without mega rounds and have $1 billion exits. um, and I think I was one of the early adopters of the pre-seed or seed strapping type
Yeah.
uh, mentality. I'm not saying that's all we focus on, but certainly, being a smaller and more capital efficient focused fund, we saw that as an attractive approach.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Well, thinking about all the, frameworks that you use to make a decision to start a fund that was not obvious at the time, if you were to leave with one idea for somebody else that's thinking about putting a big capital decision in a low information environment today, what would that be? What would you tell a person that's trying to do that, either a CEO or another investor trying to decide to put his own capital in a completely uncertain environment?
Yeah, I love this question because I think there's so many right answers, and there's
Yes.
probably so many wrong answers, but there's so many right answers. And what I love to do is find founders that are able to communicate a large picture, a large vision, large enough, hopefully just large enough for our fund, um, but that have spoken with 100 customers and have their finger on the pulse of the market today and what the problem is today, and that have developed a unique and capital efficient go to market, a unique wedge, right? So, you know, a company I'll give you a specific example. Um, One of the only companies we've done a follow-on investment into is a company called Znode, run by Brandon
Zena.
Bourne out of San Francisco. Amazing electronic design AI company. While while everyone was going after this 10-year horizon EDA, which is essentially like AI-powered electronic design of PCBs, and they wouldn't really have a working product in years, and even more importantly, the accuracy level that you need for that type of product is
True.
so high that you wouldn't be able to sell it for years. While everyone was chasing that, they looked at the market incredibly deeply from both a technical and commercial mindset and determined, hey, let's when everyone else is zigging, let's zag. Let's build something that goes after where the engineers spend the rest of their time when they're not in CAD. They're researching and looking at data sheets and trying to digest data sheets and comparing, 40 different open tabs in their browser. And let's build a tool that penetrates the market there, where we actually need much lower accuracy to be efficient and useful and create value to the customer. And they're still tackling the same giant market, but they went to market with something uh, that they can start selling almost immediately.
So yeah, so getting shorter term. So if you have something you're uncertain if some people are going to buy or that you can build something that can deliver value very quickly, and then you'll have your answer sooner than 10 years. I love that. Well, thank you for your time, Simon. Where can people find more about you, either socials and more about your book?
Sure. LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch with me or follow me. Very easy to find, Simon Lancaster with the upside down profile pic. And then the book is on Amazon. It's called Unlocking Alpha: Rise of the Niche VC. And appreciate the shout out for that and for reading it.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Well, I hope to invest a little bit more with you and
Sounds
talk to
great,
you soon.
Martin.